So I will probably introduce some people and then have everyone introduce themselves since we're a small enough group, and then we'll get this whole thing going. Mayor Singer over here, council member, has joined us as well. And just let me do it this way. The city is undergoing a comprehensive plan process. And that means that we will, through the comp plan, decide the future growth of Tavares for the next 20 years. The current comp plan was done about 18 years ago. Comp plans are good for about 20. We have 2 years to finish the comprehensive planning process. It takes about 2 years to do a full comprehensive plan. We've hired consultants to assist us and shepherd us through that 2-year process, who pretty much is all they do for Florida communities. In order to continue to move forward with the growth of the City of Tavares, our council and staff decided to put a technical advisory committee together to assist not just with the comprehensive planning process, but development for the next 2 years. Every so often we'll get a development that's moving forward under the old comprehensive planning plan. Yet we have a new comprehensive plan that's being done. Once in a while, the council is going to need advice and counseling on what to do with the project that is operating under the old comp plan when a new comp plan is coming out. So the board handpicked some stakeholders, and all of you are in this room, that were picked to give some advice and counseling, both on the current land development codes and the future land development and the future comprehensive plan. Does what I just say make sense to everybody? Yeah. Everybody have any questions on that? So we're in this gap between an old comp plan and a new comp plan. Some cities have been known to just put a moratorium until the new comp plan is done. Most of those cities get sued. Most of those cities lose. And they lose a lot. It's very costly when you do that. So our city has decided not to put a moratorium during the 2-year comprehensive planning process, but rather have a technical advisory group that is watching the comprehensive planning process as it moves forward, and from time to time give counsel and advice to the Planning and Zoning Board and to the City Council on big projects that are operating under the old comp plan, but we know there's a new comp plan coming, which may ask for a little more elbow room in our city, or less elbow room in certain areas. So I think that pretty much summarizes the Technical Advisory Committee, which many of you are part of, and the comprehensive planning process that we're going through. I'd like to go around the room very quickly so that everybody knows who's in the audience, and then I'm going to introduce the team that's going to lead us for the next hour and a half through the beginning of the comprehensive planning process. And we'll start over here. Ralph, why don't you introduce yourself and your business?
Sure. I'm Ralph Smith. I own Lake Tire Auto over in Tavares. Gosh, I didn't push everybody to do it. Just go back to the doctor. But anyway, I've been there 32 years, opened up in 1987. And love this city, love this town. Basically, I'm just a business guy. You know, a small business guy, much like Freddie Belt used to be before he made it time. And I'm really proud we got this guy as our city manager. Matter of fact, that's one of the things I'm proudest of. You've been here as long as I have. Some of you may have been, some may not. But this was a sleepy little town a decade ago. And I'm telling you, I did a radio show, and I had the former mayor of Mount Dora on my radio show, and she conceived to me that Tavares was kicking her butt. This is about 3 years ago. So just so you know, it's in large part thanks to this man.
Thank you for being here.
You bet.
Introduce yourself.
I'm Carolyn Mamoni with ERA Resort Real Estate. I was born and raised in Lake County. I was born in Leesburg, raised in Eustis. I moved to Tavares in '88, so I lived here for a long time until a couple of years ago when I moved to Ilaha, big city of Ilaha. So I'm very excited to be on this team and look forward to what we're going to do with the city of Tavares.
James.
James Dillon, City of Tavares. I'm your Public Works Director.
Bob.
I'm Bob Tweedy, City of Tavares Economic Development Director.
Tracy.
Tracy Anderson, Park Supervisor for the City of Tavares and American Wood Coordinator.
Hey, Roy, come on in. Introduce yourself.
Hi. I'm Troy. I like long walks on the beach.
And he's our newest city council member. Welcome.
Thank
To
you.
the Technical Advisory Committee of the Comprehensive Plan. Go ahead.
I just moved here about a year ago.
You know me.
Yeah.
I am Frances Eberhardt, local music instructor.
Great to see you.
Lou Boygas, citizen of Tavares, partner of the managing Tavares Waterfront Entertainment District, chair of the Lake County Museum of Art.
Thank you.
Gary Santoro, retired.
Aren't you?
Royal Harbor, yes?
Yes, sir.
Denise Lorada, Royal Harbor, I've lived here 15 years.
David Baker, semi-retired CPA from Orlando, moved up here 17 years ago and live in Royal Harbor. Hi, Roy.
Rick Gonzalez, I'm a commercial broker.
You're in a row.
Had the pleasure, sorry about that. I didn't see that. Go ahead.
Go ahead,
I'm
Ron.
Rick Gonzalez, great realtor. My name is Robert Wolf. Grew up here in City of Tavares. Graduated high school here, came back. Was on city council for a little while. Love it here. And, hey, love what's going on. I want to see what we can keep making City of Tavares prosper. So, glad
Small
to be here.
contracting business.
Yeah, thank you.
Best time I did in my bathroom. It was a great time. Commercial broker, 2005, Herb and his people came to town and said, what do we buy? I said, that, the packing house. And it's not for sale, but 6 months later we closed on it. So I set up shop here out on Main Street. Been here ever since. Sold a few things. Should get a prize for getting Nick McGrone out of town. But that's me. And it's been a pleasure watching you build this town.
All partnership, everybody. Go ahead.
Jerry Hardwich, grew up and worked in the Northeast until 40 years ago when my wife and I moved down to Florida with our family. Moved from the Longwood Lake Mary area 17 years ago. Live on the south side of Lake Dora in Squirrel Point. Real happy about living in Lake County as opposed to Seminole County and hearing I-4 go zoom, 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 zoom. And worked for corporations until 17 years ago when I started my own consulting business. Smartest move I ever made.
Don Kerr, I'm retired, but I work for this lady in front of me, Teresa Kerr. I did have a question. You mentioned this advisory group, so all of us are not in the advisory group.
Correct.
This is a general
This is
public meeting.
This is an open public meeting
Yeah,
to the public, and there are people, the majority of the people are on the advisory.
yeah. I guess my thought, and just looking over the people that are here, I sort of tallied, it's about 3 to 1. The people that are in this room are either employees of the city, on a board of the city, they're not just like me, just a resident. And so I would love to see more participation from regular residents. I don't know how you build that, but
It's a good question. So there was a public meeting about 2 months ago, and that's when the public came to it, and that was mostly the public participating in the process. This is a technical advisory committee open to the public to give input along the way as well. There'll be more public meetings like the one you're referencing,
okay.
and hopefully more people. if the public is interested in the technical advisory committee's viewpoints, they're welcome to come. But that is a different meeting. Public meetings, technical advisory meetings, both are happening to give input to this process. Teresa?
Yeah, Teresa here, and I live in Deer Island, and I'm just hoping for responsible development. I love where we live. I love that, my address is Tavares, and I want to keep it that way.
Mike Yo, moved here 14 years ago. Enjoy living here. Interested in the town of Tavares. I'm really excited about the improvements and the direction that the town's going. And I'm just interested to see what's going on.
Vance?
I think we missed one back here. Maybe it's because he's got a UCF shirt on.
Oh,
That's right. I'm Freddie Dalton. I've probably been here longer than anybody. Because I'm old. And I've taught Tavares High School for 30 years.
Basketball coach.
Coach basketball. We own Belton Financial Center, my wife and I, who's in France, and I'm just glad I didn't have to go. I got the dogs to take care of. But we have Belton Financial Center, we have Belton Insurance, Belton Bail Bonds, and we have Nurse Next Door. It's a home health business. And I've purchased a few pieces of property throughout the years, probably when I started teaching. And it's unbelievable how this area, thanks to Mr. Drury, how it's developed. And I don't want him to get all the credit for turning everything towards Ruby Street, because we have where Ruby Street Grill is, and it used to be some other businesses, and it faced Main Street, and it was just a nasty old building. And she said, I don't understand why the city doesn't, before you even, John, why the city doesn't turn everything towards the lake. The lake's the key. And then John didn't come in, and that's what ended up happening. We changed the address for Ruby Street building to from Main Street to, we tried to change it to Ruby Street, but they didn't even, it was part of the railroad right-of-way, some of that, so they didn't even have any numbers along there, and you couldn't do it. So it stopped in New Hampshire. So a lot of things have changed, and I remember the plan, I don't know how many years ago, but I know it was, it might have been then. I remember being in a meeting in this room here. I think it was this room here. We're all sitting around tables or whatever. And my wife managed a couple offices, but one of them was in Lady Lake, so she comes here and she's outside. She calls me to let me know she's here. And at the time, I'm trying to get, it was about 10, 11 years ago that this meeting happened. And at the time, I was trying to lease out the Ruby Street Grill building. And so finally I got out there, and she says, "Where have you been?" And it just hit me wrong, because and I won't use the language I used at the time, which I normally don't. And I said, "You don't understand. I can lay down in this street in the middle of the day, or after 5 o'clock, I should say, and don't have to worry about getting run over." And you can't say that anymore, because there's no telling how many cars are going to hit you before you get up. And a lot of things have changed. I like the tempo of the change. There's a lot of other good things that I think we're going to do in Tavares, I hope. And now that I've gotten rid of a few properties, I'm hoping to come back in and get involved again, because we have some other properties that we want to do some work on. So I want to thank Mr. Drury, and I'm ready to get the project going.
All right, thank you.
Just one more comment about you, John. When you first came to town, was that 7?
6, but go ahead.
Was it 6? Okay. You had a little Charla's, and you had one with Roger and us over at the Duncan House.
Yes.
And you said, previously, in line with what you just said, there was nobody downtown Friday afternoon until Monday morning, because I had a real estate office downtown. Nobody's down here. And one of the things, though, there was a hole in the ramp, so nobody used the ramp. And John said, "What do we do first?" We said, "Fix the damn ramp." 6 months later, we had a new ramp. It was you.
Yeah.
And people started coming.
Well, I appreciate the comments. It's been a team effort because of these meetings. We've had those meetings in the past. public input, as you pointed out, community input. We've got a lot of new community members. They all need to have input, and that's what we're going to do, is make sure that all the stakeholders and the community get to continue to participate as we grow for the next 20 years. Troy, why don't you introduce yourself and a little bit about your history, and then we'll introduce the team.
All right. I'm Troy Singer from the Tavares City Council, currently serving as mayor. I've been here since the late 70s. Had Freddie Belton as my algebra teacher. I've seen a lot of changes in the City of Tavares. When we first moved here, my father opened up a Napa Auto Parts store right down the street. And that time, everything was in downtown Tavares. I mean, you had your post office, you had your grocery store. You had everything. Everybody came downtown for whatever your needs were. And then we had the bypass come through, and pretty much every single business that was here on Main Street closed up. I think the only thing that was left was, I think at the time it was Town Tavern, which is now O'Keefe's. So I guess you always need a bar in town. When you're happy, you can go there. When you're sad, you can go there. So that was really the only thing that was left. So I've seen a lot of ups and downs in the City of Tavares. I've been on the Tavares City Council for the past 3 years now. It's just been a real honor to be just a very small part of just such a great team. And looking back at the history of Tavares, I want us to use that history that we've had, learn from that, and I want us to keep moving forward like we have been. We've made a lot of great strides over the past several years under Mr. Jury's direction and the staff that he's put together. And I just, I'm happy to be here. This city has turned into a real progressive city. And I think it's been mentioned here earlier, we're the envy of a lot of cities, not only in Central Florida, but I think the entire state. So I want to keep that momentum going. I want to keep moving forward. And I think with this comp plan, we're going to look at the future. We're looking at the next 20 years. We can't just think about what's going on right now. We got to look at the future. We got to plan for the future. And that's what this comp plan is set up to do. And I just want to thank all those members that are on the board. I know we don't have a lot of them here tonight. I believe we're supposed to have about 30 people on our board, if I'm not mistaken. So there is a lot of representation. I appreciate you bringing that up, Mr. Carrick, because you're absolutely right. We need to have all members from all the communities represented here. And I appreciate the public being here, and I appreciate the leadership team of Mr. Fitzgerald and Mr. Fabre for all that they've done. So that's it for me. Like I said, I just want to keep Tavares moving forward.
Thank you. Tamara?
Community Services Director, I get the warm and fuzzy part of government work. Been here a long time, and I agree with everything that you're saying. This town has changed in leaps and bounds. It's such an exciting journey, and we're just getting warmed up. So happy to see all of you here. It speaks volumes about you, about your character, and about your caring of the city. So thank you for sticking with us. That's it.
All right, with that, I'm going to go. Yes.
Say one other thing.
Sure.
For some of y'all that don't know, a lot of the properties that have not been addressed, fixed up downtown, are not people that live in Tavares. They live out of, and this has been for years, they live in other areas, these were Mount Dora uses, but they have their offices here. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of them, before they fix anything up, their idea is to Tavares to build up, then they have a retirement package when they sell their property. And there are some of us, I live in Mount Dora, but I live here, I just sleep in Mount Dora. Because it seems like I'm here all the time. But that's one of the things if you see properties, you're not going to get these people to fix them up right off. Somehow they have to buy into it. I bought into it because I taught at Tavares High School for 30 years and plus had my businesses down here for 40-something years. So keep that in mind when you're wondering why not, why can't we get more, whatever it is, retail or whatever it is down here. That's one of the problems. Some people are just sitting around waiting for it to go. So keep that in mind as we're doing all this talking.
Thank you, Freddie. TJ, introduce yourself.
Well, hi, I'm TJ Fish. I live here in Tavares. I worked for the city back in the early 2000s as the planning manager, and I have a strong interest in this comprehensive plan. because I think it really can be an extremely effective tool for the council, for you as a city manager, for the public, that a lot of communities do it because they have to. The communities that use it like the tool it is seem to be more successful.
Thank you, TJ, for being here. Thank you all for carving out time for what we're about to go through. With that, I'm going to introduce Mike Fitzgerald, our Community Development Director. He's in charge of everything from comprehensive planning to permitting to building inspections to all of that development stuff. And he's going to introduce the team, and then they're going to work us through it. And I think the goal is to be out before 7 o'clock, so that's the plan. So come on up.
I'm Mike Fitzgerald, the Community Development Director. My department is responsible for implementing everything that everyone has just said. It begins and ends with the comprehensive plan. And I heard a couple of key points mentioned, tempo and momentum. And those are the things that we are going to focus on. What is the tempo of development? What is the momentum we're going to keep? How are we going to manage the growth of the city? 1,000 people a day move to the state of Florida, and they have to live somewhere, and the businesses are going to have to accommodate them. And like I said, the comprehensive plan is step one, and everything that we glean from these meetings, we input into this comprehensive plan and build upon that, and hopefully we'll end up with a city that's a better place than when we found it. Antonio Fabre is our senior planner. He is his degree is from Rollins College. He is certified from the American Institute of City Planners, and he's an integral part of this program. And then our consulting team that we hired is Kinley Horn. This is Kelly, James, and Mike from Kinley Horn and Associates, and I'll just turn it over to them, and we'll get started.
Thanks, Mike. So, if you were here at the last meeting, you'll know that I kind of like to talk and walk and chew gum at the same time, literally. So, if for any reason you're not sure, one, if you can't hear me, just raise your hand. Two, if you've got a question, raise your hand. This is not intended to be Kinley Horn sitting here telling you a bunch of stuff, and then we all go home at the end of the night. You'll see we've got two flip charts. One says guidance, the other says parking lot. Part of this reason behind this is we're going to be asking you some questions. We're asking the group that's here, what are your thoughts? What would you like to see? We're making our assessments, we're making certain things. So if it's comp plan related, specific to what we're talking about, then we're going to put your comments. If there's a question we need to follow up on or whatever the thoughts are, they're going up on this one. If it is something related to the code, which the comp plan and the land development regulations, the code, they end up doing this at the end of the day. Right now they run kind of a parallel process, just as John said. So the folks that are on the committee that need to be informed about what needs to happen with your land development regulations, your zoning code, it's even more important that you stay engaged throughout this entire process, because at the end of the day, once the comp plan is adopted, then the city has to make sure that their regulations are consistent with that. Now, there's some interim steps that you can be doing along the way, but the important thing is to, one, stay engaged, two, ask questions, three, ask more questions. So, just for everybody's sanity, my name is Kelly Klepper. I'm our team's project lead. I've been with Kinley Horn actually 14 years at this point, 26 years in the development and planning and zoning related field. James, who's James?
Hi, there.
Yeah. James Taylor is our transportation engineer. He's going to talk about the mobility and the transportation components. That's definitely of importance to Mr. Fish. Have Mike Votto, who is a planner in our group, recent graduate of UCF. Go Knights.
Sorry, John.
Over there. And actually, I do have a little bit of a bias towards UCF. My oldest son is attending UCF as well. So, well, that's cool. So, what we're going to do is we're going to do a couple of different areas. One's going to be a kind of a recap of the community workshop, what we heard, what we saw, what you provided us with, and we're going to ask you kind of, what did you hear as well? Did we get it right? Did you hear something different? And then we're going to go into some analysis. You're going to see a lot of maps. You're going to see a lot of numbers. You're going to see a lot of things that you may go, okay, what does this have to do with the comprehensive plan? And I will tell you that everything we're talking about is integrally related to the plan itself. Why? Because the plan is more than just a land use plan. It is comprehensive. So we're looking at housing, we're looking at transportation and mobility, we're looking at public infrastructure. Yes, we are looking at land use. We are also looking at the interrelationships between the city and the county, in an area that the two governments have said, we're going to jointly plan and talk about. That has a very large bearing on what we're doing for not only the comprehensive plan, but also as this community continues to grow and develop. You may hear us say, great comment or great question, let us get back to you. Or there again, if it's something kind of outside of the realm of the comp plan, we'll put it on the parking lot, we'll come back to it. We want to try to use the next hour and a half to our advantage. But just know we'll be here to answer questions after the fact. So, just talk about that. So you're going to hear us talk there again. The summary, some existing conditions of what we do is it's also called a current plan review. And then we're going to come up and provide you some recommendations and some ideas. And that's really where we want to make sure that you're thinking about what we're talking about, why we're talking about it, and literally this becomes a dialogue amongst this group. We're not saying we're going to come out of tonight's discussion with a clear-cut, thou shalt type of policy, but at least everybody will have a general understanding of what the thought is or where we need to take it from this point forward. So, we had a community workshop about 2 months ago, and I will say that kind of like tonight, we had a very broad background, a diverse group of individuals providing comments. We had, across the 5 stations, over 250 different types of responses, which, as TJ will tell you, and Mike will tell you, that's actually really good for a community workshop, especially one that's kind of in the summer months. We'll go through some of those here in just a second, but the thing I'll say is, you're going to see a lot of information. You may go, nobody really said that. I have about 145 pages of your all's handwritten comments. So when I said at that time that I'm not editing your comments, you can go page by page on a lot of the stuff. That's somebody's handwriting right there. Some of it, I will say, was a little bit more difficult to translate, but it's all captured right there so that everybody knows we listened. So with that, we'll have Mike kind of go through a couple of the exercises and some of the information.
Right. Sure. So for some of y'all that were here a couple months ago, you'll remember this, and then also want to give a kind of a quick breakdown for folks that are just coming in tonight. So one of the stations we had was the one word, where we asked participants here to use one word to describe their vision of Tavares as it is today and their vision of the city for the future. So here's a sample of a couple of the posts, and I don't know whose handwriting that is, but you might recognize it if it's yours. So as you can see, we had grown up, and thriving as a vision. So we ended up tallying all the entries and created this, they call them a Wordle. So as you can see, growing was written more than once. So that is the way the folks here on the 7th, are verbalizing their one word for the city as it is today. You'll see some other words up there too. Here's the one word Wordle for the vision for the future. As you can see, these kind of the sizes and of the words kind of visualize the number of responses. So this kind of gives you an idea of the responses for that. So we'll kind of keep going through here because we just want to summarize these for you all. Next station we had was more or less. So here we kind of had different categories: land use and development, transportation, mobility, environmental, conservation. We even had, that's just the front page. We had another section for any other just additional comments that might not fit nicely into those categories. We asked folks to write what they'd like to see more of in the future, what they might like to see less of in the future. And we kind of tallied those up and kind of summarized some of the recurring themes. So you'll see here, just for example, under land use and development, a lot of the comments focused on parks and open space, green space, A lot of folks they'd like to see more commercial and office space. Trails, bike, pedestrian mobility was on there quite a bit. So this is kind of a quick snapshot. I won't read through all of them, but that's kind of a summary of what we got from the more or less activity. And then Kelly, I don't know if you hit on this one.
So one of the other exercises we had to do was the priority ranking. And literally, remember, we gave you this little sheet and we said, okay, out of these categories, is this a high priority for you or a low priority? And you can see just like this when people do low to high and some other things. Well, we learned early on in the process, a number of years ago, that we had to add something else because a lot of people would do kind of like what we used to do in high school with, you get close to the end of the test, and what do? You mark C. Or if you're taking the online survey for something just to get through it so you can get your bonus points for whatever, you mark everything as high. And we found out we weren't getting some really good information. So what we said was, okay, we're going to add a twist to this. You can rank, if you want to rank everything high, that's great. But then you have to rank 1 through 11. What is the highest priority out of all of that? Who is your favorite child out of that entire group? Who's your least favorite child at that moment? So what you'll see is on this one, this first column, it's actually the lower number is what you want to see. That's the most important thing to everybody. Whereas on this one, you kind of flip-flop and say, okay, it's the highest numbers. So you kind of look at that diversity. And what was kind of interesting is usually we see some level of discrepancy between the two as far as an overall priority and an individual priority. But this is actually, I think, the first time we've ever had that one category go across the board on both as both being number one or the highest ranking priority as well as from an overall perspective as well as an individual. Typically we would see some level there again of, we'll say like open spaces, buffers versus traffic and transportation, and just enough of a difference. So this is actually something new that we saw when we started analyzing the results. So at the end of the day, basically what came about, it actually kind of came across with the next information as well, which was the thought wall, is the group that provided those comments has one of the big concerns is water and environmental quality. We kind of attribute that to a lot of the fact that you've got some very pristine areas, you've got some significant lakes, you've got wetlands, you've got a lot of environmental features here that you all as a community feel are worthy of protection. I'm not going to sit there and say that land use and other things weren't important. It's just that kind of rose to the top, especially on this exercise here. When we started talking about the thought wall, you remember we had the 4 boards up and we gave you one color pad, which was kind of that pink or the orange or the yellow. And actually the pink was, what's the most important thing you want us to make sure we review and see? And we said, okay, wherever you put that pink, that's your biggest priority. Well, you can start to see the dark blue areas here. Those were where we saw the most pink. So those were the priority comments. Now we've got the comments kind of summarized out in some of our findings, but environmental conservation there again had the highest number of responses as a priority. When you start reading some of those comments, it was quality of water, quality of the lakes. There was stormwater runoff, stormwater components that were all kind of addressed in some of those items. So it was a very broad-based component. Now, when you see the numbers kind of going up like this and you see land use and development, basically everybody said, yeah, it didn't rise to the very tip top of the food chain, so to speak, but it was still nonetheless very, very important to us. And there was a lot of good comments there as well that were, buffers, setbacks, types of development, trying to ensure that we've got a mix of uses. And, and there again, really, really good comments. We've got all of those comments captured as part of the appendix that we've provided to Mike and are finalizing at this point. Now this one we did get some comments on as far as the mapping exercise, and we purposely only gave you a certain number of dots. And you notice there's a trend here that we said we don't want to just have this be the wild, wild west as far as information. We want you to really think about what information you're providing where and why. So we said, you know what, we're going to give you 5 dots. You can put them anywhere you want to, and you can either say we want it to be something that we want to see or don't want to see. But we're not going to give you, like I said, an unlimited number of dots to where the whole map gets covered up. So what you start seeing is anything with an X means that that's somebody that said we don't want to see, in this case, housing right there, or commercial right there. You start seeing, okay, what about the blues? Those are the roadways. Basically saying we need roadways or roadway improvements in these types of areas here. This was kind of interesting looking at as far as the amount of saying we don't want any more residential, but we do want to see some non-residential types of uses, whether it's shopping or employment or in office, things like that. Same thing down here in the south side of the city. So there again, we started looking at some of these trends and how that kind of comes about and comes into the discussion. Now, you may be asking yourself, okay, great, we spent 2 hours on May the 7th, we made a bunch of information, we got to play with dots, you made us rank things. What is that trying to tell us? Well, it tells this group and the team that we did not bring with us a lot of things. One, it tells us we need to focus in on the environmental components of the city, from a land use, from a transportation, from an overall environmental conservation and considerations. Two, we need to really be looking at mobility components, roadways, sidewalks, trails, the whole multi-use component that's there. And then an overarching component, especially when you start looking at where the parks and trails and things are also coming about, is quality of life. It's kind of like one of those things that we talk about with, and I think I may have used this example, and you will remember Dr. Marcioni. We had the same professor in graduate school at East Tennessee State. It's a rather large Italian. Dr. Marcioni's probably about 6'6", 6'7". He's got glasses that are about that thick. His baby sister wears a size 13 wedding ring. He graduated and lived in New York City. His brother was in the sanitation business, and I kid you not, that is an honest-to-goodness, real-world thing. Do I lie?
Not a bit.
My first planning class, he said, land use planning and planning can be broken down into 3 things: kids, dogs, and cars. And we all sat there and we're like, what? This is 7 o'clock on a Tuesday night. Kids, dogs, and cars. Kids. Where do we live? Where do we play? Where do we go to school? Dogs. How many people love seeing the dog first thing in the morning on their lawn, especially when it's not their dog? Incompatibilities. Dogs running loose, things like that. So we tied it back to that. Cars. Point A to point B. How are we getting there from a transportation perspective? Are we biking? Are we riding our cars? Are we taking public transit? Or what are we doing at that point? And that has stuck with me since 1992, which is kind of scary to think about. But we start kind of relaying all of that information, and then we start going through some of this analysis. Now, part of this is also building the story, because as part of this information, this actually goes into what we call the data inventory and analysis. And you may go, well, you got a map there with a bunch of dots. I hope somebody at the state can figure this out. Well, there again, this starts to help us derive what we're thinking and what we're looking at, especially from an analysis standpoint. We know if we see dots here, now it's not a representative sample of everybody in the city, but we know we've got a representative areas that we really need to kind of look at, especially for certain features. So that's where this kind of goes from and why we do certain things.
Can you pause and take a question?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Just a quick question. Can you speak a little bit about the group of people that showed up on May the 7th, was it? So it was a certain number of people. And of course, we're a community of 18,000, and then we've got more people that we're going to grow into that aren't that are more than the 18,000. In your experience, when you have a group of 50 people, I can't remember how many showed up to that meeting, and then a group of, how many people were at the other meeting? All right, and how many people were not? Okay. So, in your experience, how representative is that smaller group that showed up to that meeting to what all of the data is that you're collecting and building upon, number one? And number two is, what techniques do you use to be more inclusive? You know, one of the big words was inclusive for the future. And that's one of my goals, is to be inclusive. Make sure we get everybody's input people that don't live in the city that we're getting ready to annex into, and also the people that live in the city. Your experience on how representative are that first smaller micro group that did all of this, and then how do you continue to get more and more input?
So the easy thing to say is these meetings are not the most inviting. They're not the most fun to be at on a weeknight. So you typically don't see big numbers. The 50 or so folks that we had here, it was actually a very good turnout. Especially when you start looking at where we are in the season, if there's other activities going on, the time and day of the week and all of that. So, would we like to have seen 200? Absolutely. Will we take 50? Absolutely. Unfortunately, a lot of it depends on how engaged the community is and how engaged they want to be. I will say from across the board, as far as the types of responses, that's very representative of what we were anticipating seeing, in all honesty. Especially with the lakes and the transportation being where they are, John. How do we go about, if money is no object, then there's different things that you can do to do different forms of public outreach. And when I say money's no object and you've got more than a limited amount of time, and I'm not trying to say that comp plan's not that level of importance, but you've got a certain amount of time to get one done from when we started. Online surveys or taking the workshops out to neighborhoods, you're not going to get that many more responses, unfortunately.
Well, and I think the only thing I would add, and I know Don's got a question, is that through this process of having multiple meetings, having it go before the P&Z board multiple times, and then the city council multiple times, I would think through that process, we will get more and more public input on areas that need to be tweaked. You've answered the question. Thank you.
I got one thing to add on to that is, as we are doing these presentations and all this data and information, we're packaging it up and actually working with the clerk's office in the city to make sure it is ADA compliant so that we can post the information on the city's website so that, as Mr. Kerr says, hey guys, you all missed a great meeting. Take a look at the PowerPoint that's on the city's website. You can kind of start seeing that information as well. The other thing I would say is, if you know your friends and neighbors who could not be here, is have them email, pick up the phone, schedule a time with Mike and Antonio, and say, guys, can I take a look at the information that was prepared as part of the May 7th? I'd like to provide my comments. Just because somebody is not here at one of these meetings does not mean that they cannot provide a comment and that we will not take that into consideration. To the contrary, we want to see those comments coming through.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I wonder if you could go back to the previous slide, please.
Sure.
And to comment, John, on your thoughts, I have a degree in architecture and land planning, a long time ago. My comment is that many people, most people, almost all people, don't get involved in their local government until they feel threatened. That's when they show up. As an example, many of you are familiar that out in the Shirley Shores area, we had a pretty contentious argument over a 222-acre site. We filled this room 3 times to capacity with people in the hallway because those people were threatened. So that's why they show up. I'm sorry that they don't show up for this. I will do a better job of trying to encourage our folks to show up. But I think you're seeing 2 distinct, different populations of people in this community. And many of them that are in this room are people that are highly supportive of downtown Tavares. And I'm supportive of downtown Tavares. My hobby lives off of the docks in downtown Tavares. So I like to see downtown Tavares thrive. But there's a whole huge segment of the population where I think you're getting the environment and the water and all the rest of those comments are from people who live in the rural areas of this community, and they feel threatened by what is going on. I'm going to give you an example. If you'll look go to the middle of your drawing and go just to the right of it, and yeah, see all the red dots and the yellow, don't build it, no, up higher, in the, right there.
I'm short.
Right. Those of us who live here, that's it. Those of us, that is a screaming result of what I'm talking about. So what you see is a whole bunch of people put their little red dots and said, well, that's where we think office and light industrial should be. Well, it turns out that's where our light industrial area is. Then you see a whole bunch, 3 people that absolutely don't put housing here. Okay? Right now, in front of the city council, there is a project to put 5 4-story apartment buildings on that site with 250 units, which is 500 cars. It's one of the most obscene overreaches I've ever seen of lack of proper planning. And yet, that has made it through planning and zoning, it's made it through staff, it's made it to city council, and it's, you're seeing the visual result of what's going on. So my question to you is, what does a community do in order to ensure that comprehensive plans are followed? So I've probably done development in 20 cities, and I know, Teresa, I'm sorry. I've done development in over 20 cities.
Just keep us succinct. We got a lot of slides.
I know.
No, you're good. Keep
I'll
going.
stop.
No. You're on a good roll. I want to hear it.
I have never seen most communities look at their comp plan, and it is gold. That's what we plan to, is the comp plan. And when someone comes in and wants to do something that violates the comp plan, the answer at the counter is not no, it's hell no. It's go away. And most cities set up a separate board just to deal with people who really want to do something against the comp plan. And they meet once a year. So every meeting we have now, we're violating our comp plan.
So here's, let me kind of, because that's actually a really good segue into a couple of things. So thank you for that. I'm going to start with the easy things first, which is part of the discussion level that you're seeing right now, and Mike can correct me if I'm wrong, is based off of the rules and regulations that the city has in play at this moment.
Mm-hmm.
So if that shows up as residential, or there's a residential component or mixed use with one of the mixed use areas, residential is permitted per the current comprehensive plan and the current zoning districts. So I'm just saying that no, there are provisions in the state actually said you can make changes to your comprehensive plan, but here's a list of analysis. A lot of things that have occurred on the comprehensive plan level have been changed not by the local community, but by Tallahassee.
Mm-hmm.
Transportation is a big one. The old DCA days, the Department of Community Development, and we're going to be talking about that, went from a maximum level of growth that each community is capped out at, the ceiling, and instead said, no, we're going to make it, you got to at least provide for this level. So they've changed, the rules have been changed along the way. They used to basically say you couldn't amend your comp plan more than twice a year.
You couldn't violate it twice a year?
Amend it twice a year.
Okay.
They've changed that and said it's up to your discretion now as a community. You could do it once a month, you could do it once a year, you could do whatever. Some communities, and there again, that becomes a community-driven item that the council and staff and everybody kind of need to basically come together and say, we only want to hear comp plan amendments twice a year, and it's going to be on this cycle. Sarasota County says, we're going to review the comprehensive plan every year. All applications have to be heard or brought in, submitted to staff by, I think it's April 30th of each year. Now, if you want to go out of cycle, you have to make a special request and go to the council, or in that case, the county commission, to say, we want to do an amendment, here's why, and this is the process. And so it becomes that public process. But going back to this, there again, change is coming. Part of the reason that the city hired us is to look at things a little differently, to try to look at things that maybe make a little bit more sense, update the comp plan, and at the same time give you all the tools, the city the tools, and the folks that are on that committee, the ability to make changes in the code that are consistent with the visions at that point. So let me go through this so we can get to some of the analysis. This just kind of summarizes there again what are some of the key takeaways, and this kind of starts to shape some of the thought processes that we have as a larger team. Environmental protection, lakes quality, housing options, affordability. As Mike reminded me, and I hear a lot of times, it's not the fact that we have a lack of affordable housing. We have, in some cases, just the opposite. Depends on where you live. Trails, bikes, and pedestrian infrastructure, road improvements, parks, and open space. So you can kind of see how that all kind of comes together at that point. So let me ask this question right now. What are the general thoughts and reactions from this group? What you thought you'd hear, what you didn't think you'd hear, a little different than what you heard?
I had a lot of fun reading through all the comments, and the map was fascinating because when you start looking at the dots, you see a personal story behind almost every one of them. So as I looked at people's thoughts, I felt great that water quality is important to everyone. And then I thought, well, you know, we're doing a pretty awesome job at addressing water quality. Our eco park is now open, and that was a huge deal. And I thought, well, people want improvements, trails, roads. I wonder if they even know some of the improvements that are forthcoming, that we're going to eventually have a trail between Tavares and Mount Dora that goes on to Seminole and Orange counties, connects to the Coast Trail, and will connect to Leesburg one day. A lot of people don't even know that. Some people don't know that Dead River Road's intersection is going to be improved. Or some people assume that we'll just keep widening the roads, but we will never 8-lane 441, and we will never 6-lane in my lifetime. And I'm only saying that because the money is not there. We will not be 6-lane State Road 19. In fact, I'm not even sure when we're going to get to 4-lane it. All we're getting is a bridge. There is no 4-lane coming. So those are the kind of things when I started looking, I saw a lot of green dots on areas that are actually wetlands. So what was it that people were wanting there? Parks, trails, or just protection?
All of the above. Passive parks, increased environmental protections, water quality. So literally it was, we recognize this as a key environmental area. We don't want to mess it up.
And I really want to be succinct, but since I live in Tavares, I plan for a living. The one thing that I want everyone in the room to take seriously that's an economic factor for Tavares is when you look at that map and you look at the fountain that's sitting here at the intersection of 19441, and you kind of see that as a central point of Tavares, and you draw that radius, you hit a lot of water, which affects the economics of Tavares. That the retail that we want here has an issue because they look at that radius, and they want rooftops. And you look at the fact that from a service provision standpoint, we're almost like a coastal community because we're on an isthmus, a land bridge. So when I look at what we're really dealing with, I don't want people to be scared of residential density because we only have so much land to work with. I think our challenge is, where is density the devil and where is density the angel? Where can we fit people where it makes sense, where they can walk and bike and not put too many cars on the road and be connected to our downtown and our opportunities, and where would we really need to spread things out a little bit more?
So, yes, sir, you want your hand up?
No,
Oh, that was just Jill in front of you. The one that took your spot earlier.
TJ summarized it. I was going to touch on affordability. I saw on those notes, one line said more affordability, and the other said less apartments. Where is that? It doesn't work. And the houses come before the businesses come, period. So affordability is, and when you start thinking about a comprehensive plan and you start dictating something like, and TJ had this conversation this week, is something like a 40-foot lot a band in this city? You can't do that if you want to grow. You've got to have a mix of uses that meet the demand and the affordability. If you start dictating something like no 40-foot lots, it doesn't work financially. And if that doesn't matter to you, fine. Just make a mandate.
This young lady's had her hand up a little bit.
Thank you for the young lady part. I don't think it's as much affordability as options. I think that's where our biggest issue is at. We have one apartment complex in the entire city of Tavares that is a regular apartment. We've got professionals. There's folks that don't want to buy homes. They want to rent. They want to rent a nice apartment. So we don't have those options. That one complex is maxed out. And again, that was the thought behind the apartments on Old 441, having the options that we could benefit from a lot of different communities coming in through that corridor of 441, which that would be interesting to see what the vision there is.
No more comments?
I think that's a great idea. I just think, and his survey showed, that that's the wrong place. High-density development needs to be close to downtown. When you get out, in my opinion, most land planners, I think, would suggest high-density should be close to downtown, so you can bike, you can walk, you can do parks, you can shop, etc. And you put your lower-density items out away from town. I live 8 miles away from where we are sitting, and it was zoned county, which was 1 unit on 5 acres. The minimum current zoning in the city of Tavares is 3 units on 1 acre. That's a 1,500% upswing in density, and it's wrong. So the code should have 1 acre, 3 acre, 5 acre for rural areas.
So let me just kind of, and I'll come back to you, I promise. You're absolutely correct, 1 to 5. The county has provisions in there that allow you to go to 1 to 3, 1 to 1, and
with open space, 50% open space.
And other provisions, yes. So that's, yes, sir.
Just looking at the results that you showed, and I wasn't at the first meeting, is that seems to be awfully skewed towards, I think, against people that drive or that are out in the rural areas. It seems to be heavy on, what I call environmental issues, and that maybe all those people were caught in the traffic jams on Dead River Road and Shirley Road and some of these others because this city only budgets, they just discussed it, $200,000 for roads, yet they want to spend $27 million for a entertainment complex. And I think that that there must be people in the HOAs and things on these roads that it's too much of a hassle to come down here, and either you take the approach that, well, if they aren't going to be engaged, then they're just going to be surprised, which I go to a lot of planning and zoning meetings at different cities and make videos, and there seems to be a lot of naive people in this county, and maybe they need a huge warning sticker on all the houses that say, growth is coming, but we aren't going to fix the roads, in my opinion.
Okay, I want to digress for 1 second because I'm going to ask my learned compatriot here who served on the MPO for a period of time. What is the, what is the current amount of roadway improvements that are identified in the long-range transportation plan? I know you guys are getting ready to do an update versus how much money is available, and where's that money coming from?
Well, see, I moved here in 2002, and when I moved here, they were widening to 6 lanes, 441 in Tavares.
Can you stand up so we all can hear you, please?
Sure. They were widening 441 in Tavares back in 2002. Well, the plan was to widen 441 to 6 lanes all the way through Lake County. So please note that here we are 17 years later, and they're just getting started this year on Lady Lake, and they still have to do by downtown Leesburg, and they still have to do Mount Dora to connect to the Wekiva Parkway. And that spends all the money for the next 20 years. That's why we don't have 19 4-laning coming down to Royal Harbor.
Yeah, and one of the things James is going to talk about a little bit is something along those lines is that becomes part of the priority listing, and that's the reason the city does a capital improvements plan. That's the reason they have representation on the transportation planning organization, roadway improvements and everything funded, identified, prioritized, and all of that. I'm going to keep going because we're going to run out of time otherwise. So Mike is going to take us through some existing land use analysis, and this is where we're really going to get some more detail, some more meat.
Thanks, Kelly. All right, so in working on developing the update to the comprehensive plan, we kind of need to look at a snapshot of what is on the ground now under the current conditions. So we ran some analysis with the most recent available data from the Florida Department of Revenue and their land use codes on what's on the ground and their parcel descriptions in their data. So here's a snapshot of kind of what is on the ground within the city now. Again, per the most recent data from DR that we had available, so there might be a couple little things that are different just from recent events, but this generally gives a snapshot of what is on the ground within the city right now.
But according to who?
The Florida Department of Revenue.
Okay.
And they get their information from the property appraiser.
Yeah, those are actual land uses, not future land uses.
Well, at the bottom right, I'll use very short, the bottom right corner is the development I'm talking about, which is now 100% residential. There's no miscellaneous and there's no commercial on that site.
It's just not building it.
Correct, and that's, again, represented the data, the most recent DOR data, and that annexation was recent. So,
They do not update their information every single day. They do it on a schedule. So there again, some of this information is going to, you'll just like you said, this is already developed, but it's not made it into the system yet.
Right. So again, just trying to paint a general picture of the uses on the ground, like TJ said, not future, existing. Here's basically a summary of that data by parcel and total acreage. So you'll see these are the categories from DLR, and I have some of the background information, but those are basically aggregated categories. So residential will have single family, multifamily, so on and so forth. So that's all encompassing of a residential land use per DLR. So again, just giving you a snapshot of what's on the ground is basically a graph of the map that we just looked at. And then per that same data, those are approximations of the single family and multifamily units that are in the city right now. And similarly, approximation of the non-residential square footage on the ground.
Please don't pass this up right here. Point out government versus residential.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Well, also Tavares is a unique dynamic with the county government down the street.
And the school district.
Right. So yeah, a little bit different than maybe some other spots. So yes, that does kind of jump out with the dynamic between those two uses.
So as we start building the story, so what is the future land use call for? So that pretty map that hangs up on Mike and Antonio's wall that says, this is where we think there's going to be residential, if it's suburban or moderate density or all the way through to industrial, that's what's currently mapped out as we speak. Now, I will tell you that we did a painstaking analysis using the geographic information system, so basically computer modeling of all the data that the city has, and basically start coming up with, per the map as you have it right now, here's the total acres that are designated per the comprehensive plan for each of those. So it's a little difficult to see, my apologies, but like mixed use commercial, that's about 230 total acres, and there's an additional 57 of that kind of left out of that category. You kind of see where we're going with that. And then the other thing that we did just for discussion, so everybody can kind of see, and I apologize, this is a little smaller than we thought when we printed it out. But you know, if you ever wanted to know, okay, so what does suburban land use give us? 3 dwelling units per acre. So you can literally start looking at what is and what we call the carrying capacity based on the comprehensive plan between what's there adopted now versus what's on the ground. And so you start actually comparing numbers and information like this versus this, and you start seeing where some of the discrepancies are falling.
And where are they?
So one of the things that we start looking at is combining that existing land use with the future land use. And we say, and basically we start looking at what's identified right now by the property appraiser and the state as vacant. So we took that vacant layer and we said, okay, what is the designation for those properties right now? So, because just for this preliminary discussion, we said, if it's already developed, we're going to take that off the table and look at what is the potential for additional development on those lands, because we're not seeing a whole lot of redevelopment at a large scale. So most of the development that we're going to see, especially of a magnitude, is going to be on the vacant lands. So we start identifying, mapping out where those areas are. And then we start looking at, okay, so if we start looking at population projections, which Mike's going to talk about, and then we start looking at what is the overall growth projections per the state, per the region, and we start looking at where is that growth and how does it occur. You start looking at, well, there's some development potential, and there again, these numbers are so small, my apologies, but we actually start looking at what could be developed, all things being equal. And now the Public Works Director is probably looking at this going, what in the world are we talking about here, because now I got to serve all of that. So when he's doing his water supply facilities plan, or he's doing a stormwater master plan, or he's looking at a bunch of different things, he's got to look at what's the maximum potential of development so that he can be planning accordingly as part of the CIP. And that gets back to what are we funding from a roadway, from a water, from a wastewater, all of those great components there.
That previous map, the one helpful thing that I think would help the general public put in perspective that I don't think is reflected on that is some of those properties that are shown as developable, the wetlands on those properties.
Correct.
So once you do that, it really decreases the amount of developable land that Tavares actually has.
Yep.
Well, and the other white elephant in the room is look at the giant hole right in the center. That's 1,400 acres, just below that, come down to the green. That's 1,400 acres that is currently called lakefront or lake view, lake something mixed use. I would make an argument that the entire future of the city hinges on what happens at East Park.
I wouldn't disagree. So we take this one step further. And this is where everybody's heads usually go explode if they haven't done so already. Because we start talking about a lot more numbers. We actually get into a lot more analysis as part of our stuff here. But we say, okay, because the city and the county have an interlocal service boundary agreement, so they basically have, in essence, a joint planning agreement that says, we all agree we're going to jointly plan, address, and assess areas that are in this boundary right here, keeping in mind that that gray line is the city. You've got county property, so basically those areas that could potentially grow and develop, become part of the city through annexation or whatever process. And then we also, so we have to start looking at those land uses as well. Why? Because one, the state says we have to. Two, because some of those are the future growth areas. And our Public Works Director's head is now spinning even worse. To the point going, okay, how am I serving this? So we have to give him some tools to make this kind of a reality, so to speak. So we start looking at what is the development potential, not only the vacant lands in the city, but also the lands within the county that could be developed. And we actually have to start kind of marrying up Tennessee. Where those city land use categories and standards fall with the county, and is there a gap, an overlap, or are they pretty consistent? And I will tell you, part of our discussion that we're going to have towards the end of this is you got some stuff that does this. So if something comes in and gets annexed, you really need to be thinking about what is going to develop as and at what density and intensity. So Mike is going to say now, based on all of that, what do we really need to be planning for population-wise?
So here's the population projections per 2010 is the census data. The projections are per the Bureau of Economic and Business Research with the state. So again, giving a snapshot of where the population of the city is going. So you'll see on the chart we have 2018 just to kind of show kind of where we're at now next to 2020, so you don't necessarily see the jump between 2018 and 2020 that you do over the course of those 3 decades there. But again, like Kelly mentioned earlier about per Florida statutes, we're planning for we're not planning for the we're planning for the minimum level. So we're planning for the Bieber projection of 25,375-ish in 2040. And sure.
Again, I'm not going to question lots of smart folks, but flat out, even just doing the quick math, we had 5,000, an increase of 5,000 people in town across 8 years, and the projection is 500 people across 2 years. So to me, that the numbers don't add up. Or what this doing is this is making the assumption that the smart people know what the additional available property is in order to accommodate said people. Otherwise, because that doesn't seem right. I think the numbers light.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of factors go into that, and then Bieber. Well, sorry for saying the acronym there.
Real quick, is anybody a University of Florida grad? A University of Florida graduate? Okay, my apologies. That's the state organization at University of Florida that comes up with state population projections. So So I'm going to blame UF. If it was UCF, it'd be much more accurate, in my opinion.
I just would like to echo his sentiment. Got here in 2000 and, let's say, about 6, 7. There were 9,000 people. The population since I've been here has doubled, right? From 9 to 18,000. And he's pointing out that there's only 5,000 people from 2020 to 2030. Just knowing Florida and knowing what's going on in Central Florida and seeing what's going on here, I would agree with you. It's like 5,000 people over the next 10 years, I think is very light. Just from a planning perspective, I would echo your sentiments. And based on what I've seen over the last 10 years, with our population doubling in 10 years, I would think it's going to be more than 5,000 people over the next 10 years. With Avalon coming on board, the ISBA coming on board, that property that Don pointed out, that 1,000 he thought was 400, but it's 1,600 acres over there coming on board, and the amount of vacant land that is throughout Tavares along State Road 19, there will be more than probably 5,000 people over the next 10 years.
So the one thing I will say is we look at these numbers and we kind of do the same thing, which is, yeah, I'm not buying it either. The state says thou shalt use a uniform source of information. Beaver is the primary source. Now, we have the ability to kind of say go off the reservation and look at, talk with the TPO. We can talk to the Water Management District because, believe it or not, everybody does their own set of projections. And so what we're going to take away from this is, okay, this is the first shot across the bow that we have to take a look at. If the committee is saying not only no, but no, it's too low, then we know.
It's saying look at it.
Then we know we've got to go back and re-look at a different source and see if that's marrying up a little differently. And James and Mike will be talking with the TPO as far as that's concerned.
This may be a stupid question, but if there's only so much land, then, I mean, people can't just keep coming here. I mean, unless you guys want to be a suburb of Orlando. I mean, that's the way I see it. There's a limited amount of land, so you can't just the population can't just keep going.
I think you're at the crux of the difference between what city people, etc., versus people that live rurally. So I think we're making an assumption here that says growth is good and big growth is better. Whereas a lot of the places that I've done work in, the cities work day and night to prevent people from moving there. You lose money. Every person that builds a house and moves here, you lose money on.
So I'm going to stop you right there just for a moment and say, we're not saying that growth is good or big growth is even better. We're just presenting information so that this group, especially Mike and Antonio, at the end of the day, have something to base some of their decisions off of. So now what I will say is, you're absolutely correct. There's only so much land. There's more land. Yes, there's a lot of land that still can be developed. That's the reason we look at that vacant land and we start looking at what those densities are that are projected to be on that land. And this kind of gets summed up with the next question that Mike's going to ask this group. Yeah, you jumped ahead on us, so this is a good thing.
Right, so.
But she asked a great question.
Yes, yeah.
And one of the things I feel strongly about is, I love the data-driven process. So what are the entitlements? I mean, there's landowners out there that have a right to get development approved. And we have to take that legally seriously.
So,
wait a minute, this question, does the city have sufficient land to accommodate projected growth? You go back to the other slide, your projected growth is low. So if your projected growth is low, then what is the answer to this question?
So I will tell you that Mike and I have talked about this quite a bit. How old is your youngest daughter now?
10 months.
10 months old. So I will tell you that even if we look at Beaver and the highest growth rates out there, especially looking at that ISBA and everything that's out there, now I'm not saying this to be mean, No one in this room will be alive before we run out of land to accommodate at full build out. We quit running the number at about 2080 because, and we realize there's a lot of factors that go into that. Because one, not every piece of property is created equal. Some have wetlands, some have limited access or soils, they don't have water, wastewater. So you got to kind of take that into consideration. The other part of this is just because something is designated for a low density or whatever, and it's projected to be or maximum of 5.6 dwelling units per acre, the chances it's going to be developed at 5.6 dwelling units per acre is about that much.
Zero.
So what will it be
Typically, what we see
developed?
is about half.
Yeah, 3.
So we, as planners and engineers and transportation folks, we start, I'll say, doing the real world game of, okay, this is what the numbers are saying, this is real world, where are we kind of falling at the end of the day? And we start coming back at, even when we start ratcheting down and taking out a lot of that, either setting aside a certain percent of the land that is not going to be developed, or we run the scenarios at half the density being developed, we're still good.
You're saying that the actual development is less dense than the projected?
Yes.
That's not by my experience.
I have to disagree a little bit because the city doesn't have the sufficient land in order to accommodate the projected growth it's going to have to happen through annexation from Lake County. And if you look at all of the property that's out there today for the potential to be built upon, it's all in the unincorporated area of Lake County. And that's where all the for sale signs are, for sale of the old horse farms, the orange groves and stuff like that. So is the city, can they accommodate the growth? Not really, but it can when it has to incorporate all the rest of those. And by law, they have to incorporate because they have to tie into the city water and sewer, which is part of the city rules that if you want to tie in, you have to be a part of it. So
I will tell you, just looking straight at the raw numbers, looking at that and that those joint plan areas, you're good. Even at, for the most part, that. Yes, ma'am.
The numbers that we're looking at for the, that's literally an increase in population, or is that people moving here, just a general number of people that are going to move here?
That's births, deaths, net migration in, migration out, that's the whole gamut. So, yes, ma'am.
My sister has a building permit in Key West, and they're frantically trying to get the place built because they were told 2023 no more building permits are going to be issued in Key West. So how do you tell people it's got a parcel of land they can't build on it?
Okay, that's a different topic. You and I talk after that.
Okay.
The Keys have a different set of standards. Monroe County has what's called a rate of growth ordinance, a ROGO. We love our acronyms. And basically, the state and the county all got together and said, okay, we're going to allow the county and each municipality a certain number of residential permits per year through this permit period right there. It's all based on water and infrastructure. But let's you and I talk after this a little bit more. Yes, sir.
What sort of density are you projecting?
What did we were looking at kind of across the average of, oops.
Yeah, so
yeah.
Are we talking about what the city future plan
we
build out? We
yeah.
took the available acreage and kind of worked the numbers based on the current future land use densities and intensities.
But you didn't answer my question.
What's the answer?
What's that?
What density?
What's an average housing density for the total of the city?
How many per acre?
That varies. It varies.
Now or in the future? This was basically 3 years per acre.
Yeah, what TJ just said, is your typical subdivision, it's going to be 3.2 to 3.6 depending on the width of your lot at the maximum. When you take into effect building the roads and everything else.
We're not saying that. We're looking at, let me go back to these cities. Did we take an overall average density between 25 and all of that? I was going to say no. We looked at each of the individual categories and started applying a factor at that point. So the easy number to say is we could say, here's what we say overall is going to be a citywide.
What gets confusing is that our policy says 5.6, And so we go, oh, well, that's kind of dense, right? But then when you actually engineer a subdivision, and you do your stormwater and your streets and your utility easements and your buffers, you're getting about 3 units per acre. The difference in Tavares is we have this opportunity in downtown and where we have big infrastructure like US 441 to put higher density. And I'll say this and be done, but the reason I'm excited about that is I've enjoyed living in Tavares and watching my taxes stay low. And the reason is the city councils have made good decisions about non-residential development. And I think the new era is multifamily and higher density in the right places. So maybe there's been some proposals that weren't the right places, but when you do it right, that means that the tax burden on me and you is less, because a normal house in Tavares, for every dollar you pay, the city is spending about $1.20 to $1.40 to serve you. For every non-residential property, they're spending about 80 cents to serve them. So residential is subsidized by non-residential, and multifamily really helps subsidize the subdivisions. So I'm interested in how my taxes are going to stay up.
So that's the reason I wrote, I think I heard that from a couple of different folks, is make sure we're focusing density in and around and adjacent, very close proximity to downtown. Let's keep going. We'll keep answering some questions though. Transportation, because everybody wants to talk about roads, and I've got to make sure. And trails, and sidewalks, and bike trails, and all kinds of stuff.
So James Taylor, also with Gillinghorn, professional engineer, I'll be doing the transportation element of the city, helping out with that. And what we have to date is really just the existing analysis as a jump off point for discussion. And obviously we can't do those future scenarios until we hash out what the land use is going to be in the future. So as part of the comp plan analysis, the state requires us to do that data inventory and analysis for each element, and that includes traffic. We'll do an existing 2018 condition, which we pretty much have hashed out, a 5-year horizon for a short range, and then a long-term horizon, 2040. The study area is basically everything inside of that ISBA. We want to anticipate what's going on in the entire area in the event that all that is annexed or otherwise incorporated. And these are all the county roads that are in the city, and I will put your attention on the last couple of columns. B over C, so that's the volume on the roadway today over the capacity of the roadway, so over one bad, under one good in terms of it being a deficiency or not. And then the last column is kind of that qualitative thing that you hear in a lot of comp plans, level of service. It's like the report card grade, A is good, F not so good. It means you're kind of suffering density and delay-wise out there on the network. Today, we're not identifying any county roadways based on the latest data from the NPO that have unacceptable level of service per the comp plan's adopted LOS standard. The state road, we're all aware that State Road 19 is under construction now, and TJ kind of alluded to the fact that some of it's funded, some of it's not, and it is an existing deficiency today. So that is definitely one we need to keep in the plans and identify as an existing deficiency and really see where that traffic diverts as congestion builds, and assuming that one day it will be built, but when is that day, we don't know. So using that table graphically and putting it on a map, the green is an indication of where today you have that level of service C. Yellow is a level service D, so it's kind of getting to the tipping point. And then we have that one link, State Road 19, that's level service F. And then we already talked about State Road 19 and the fact that the roadway widening, the whole length from County Road 48 up to 561, all we're getting today funding-wise is the bridge replacement. The only funds available for the rest of the link is planning and engineering, preliminary engineering. So that's roads. We're going to get deep into multimodal, especially in the future conditions, and especially based on where the future land use is assumed. We want to accommodate denser development with sidewalks and bikes, and the trail is a really good point for recreation. I'll be up here on the weekends for sure, driving that thing all the way back and forth between Mount Dorian. So next steps for traffic is really, I'm in a holding pattern until we hash out what the future land use assumptions are. And then once we have what those are, we have a lot of different ways that we can project what the future volumes are going to be on these facilities and what the impacts are where the denser development pushes traffic volume to one side of the city or the other, or where it actually shortens the trip lengths because the trip pairs are happening close by. You don't necessarily have to get in your car to drive across to the shopping center because it's one next door to you that you can walk to. So we will look at count trends. We will also look at travel demand modeling. DOT has a travel demand model that the MPO regularly uses, and TJ is very familiar with this model, where you put in the future assumptions into models. So this is number of houses, number of jobs, where the schools are, and we forecast out where those traffic volumes are going to go. And there's a little bit of logic because the model is kind of a big picture tool. It's calibrated to roadway segments, but we're going to use a little bit of logic where the model isn't dialing into those problem areas that we know exist at intersections, for example, at State Road 19, 561. Make sure the model's doing what we anticipate, please.
In my neighborhood, where Tavares is annexing now, Tavares has nothing to do with the roads. It's all county, and the county doesn't have the money to improve the roads. So what are we going to do about that?
The city has a lot of language in their comprehensive plan that we are recommending to keep in about advocating with the county and coordinating with the county DOT to keep ahead of such things. A lot of times what you'll find is, the MPO doesn't have the data, so we need to get that data to them so that they can plan accordingly. But you're correct.
I'm very concerned about that because it's, you can't just keep putting in developments and no one takes care of the road.
And lucky for you, you live in Tavares, so that the county's right there. You can definitely attend some of those meetings and advocate on behalf of the city and the county as well. No.
They don't have the money.
Well, the reason they
Well, they tell you they don't.
15 seconds. The reason the county doesn't have the money is because in 2008-9, they reduced their impact fees for developers by 86% in order to try to encourage development to come here. They've recently raised it back up to about half of what it should be. So the current impact fees in most of the county area is less than $1,000 a house. I've never lived anywhere in my life that the development did bear the full burden of all improvements, public improvements, water, sewer, roads, etc. For some reason, we don't do it here. And that should be, I think, the number one thing on your priority for roads is you got to work with the county to get them to raise their damn tax.
And you're right. And we do traffic studies a lot in areas where they're trying to develop that impact fee that accommodates all that growth. And then what you'll have is your city council or your county council will make a policy decision to cut that in half to make it it's excellent.
If I may give you a little background, TJ would like me up on this. I was on the Capital Facilities Advisory Committee about 5-6 years ago. And we have a county, and God love them, they're good people, but they don't have any understanding of the fact that we're going to need roads. And from my understanding, Orange County is a percentage, I think it's like 8%, as I recall. It could be a little bit off on that, of their general budget for transportation. You know what Lake County uses? Nada. We tried to talk them into doing 2% incrementally increase it, went nowhere. We were just basically a bunch of people that wasted our time as a sounding board to justify what they wanted more than what they did.
Well, to take that one more step, let's talk about a couple roads that are always talked about here. Shirley Shores Road, Egg River Road, Woodley Road, Old 441. The only funding source the county uses to add capacity is impact fees, as was said. They're using your gas tax that you pay, and they're using the sales tax to just maintain roads, resurface roads. So when you talk about improvements, are you talking about adding capacity, which usually means going from 2 to 3 to 4 lanes? Or are you talking about making it a better 2-lane road? Completely different funding sources, completely different challenges working with the county. But I will say, as a planner, and I think this is in the interlocal service boundary agreement we have with Lake County, is if the city's annexed, 51% of that roadway, shouldn't that be the city's?
That's
Yeah.
not in the ISBA. It's
Yeah.
categorically prevented. And for any road that the city, when the city annexes, et cetera, the road has to be brought up to the city standards before the county can give it to the city. So that's a huge barrier for why it doesn't happen.
So James and I literally were thumb wrestling over this one. I didn't want to throw this one out. I did, James didn't. Remember that one little comment I made earlier about the state? The state, a couple of years ago, made some changes to state law that took a lot of what you're asking for, and which a lot of communities all across the state said, we want more control over our roads. The state said, well, you know what, if the roadway segment is broken, I'll let James kind of elaborate on this, but basically it's assumed to be in your capital improvements plan. So you basically can't say no to development under certain circumstances. It's pay and go or just go.
And we still have school concurrency. You just don't have road concurrency whatsoever.
Depending on where you're at.
Yeah.
Orange County didn't get
Yeah, so, what else, James?
So, thoughts on traffic, thoughts on, especially multimodal comments. I mean, that's valuable stuff to us to hear locally. What are people envisioning in the future for these trails and sidewalks, and where to build these things?
Yeah, when you evaluate the road system for the future, take a look at where they're putting the next elementary school in Tavares. They've got it designated out there off of Woodley Road, and so that will obviously affect all the roads in that area. You know, once you put schools in and everybody starts heading to them, just make sure you look at where the school has designated its next schools for Tavares.
Well, I just looked at this and I think, okay, if everybody's going to ignore the traffic problems, they're not going to fund the roads, the city won't cover the cost for these roads, then stop development approvals. Just
Which ones are we
stop.
talking about?
Like Shirley, the ones you mentioned. You know, Highway 19 is just getting massive because of the intersection at 561 now. Because Google is sending everybody down. Well, but at what point you can't drive to it? And the people that are here, maybe.
Times the allowed.
Well,
19 feet wide, it's supposed to be 24. And it's in poor condition.
Hey, gentlemen.
And
Mr. Carrick, good job. So, we could have a discussion on transportation, growth versus no growth, development versus no development, till the cows come home. But we only have a little bit more time tonight, and we'll be here for a while. So, any other thoughts or questions on transportation?
Well, I can't help but talk about transportation. So again, 441 and 19, our comp plan just needs to suggest that they are what they are for the next generation. Maybe after 2040, maybe the MPO will say in their next plan update there'll be money there. But what people don't know is we get federal highway money, we get DOT money from the state, and if it's not in the Metropolitan Planning Organization's cost feasible plan, you don't get the money. Well, State Road 19 is not in the plan. It's recognized as a need, but it's not in the plan. And that's why there's no 8 laning at 441, the 6 laning is it. There's no 6 laning 19 from the fountain. And there currently is not even money for the 4 laning on down to Royal Harbor and to Halley. So that's one part of it, out of the way. We just talked about the county. Pretty sad state of affairs there. Where my optimism is at least we have an active trail study that's going to lead to a trail connection from downtown Tavares to downtown Mount Dora. And beyond Mount Dora, it's a funded project. They're literally building the trail to Seminole County and Orange County. So one day, we will have a trail connection from here to the Central Florida Coast to Coast Trail, opening up even more ecotourism. Right along 46 to the Weehawken Parkway and on into Seminole.
Where between Tavares and Mount Dora?
Yeah, just, are you going to be addressing multimodal in that section? Are you going to be addressing multimodal in that transportation section?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Would you speak a little bit towards the golf cart ordinance that we have? So we allow golf carts in our city. Just speak to that a little bit because we allow it in our community. and talk about whether we can or cannot connect our golf cart multimodal transportation system to across 441 to our residential communities up there. Right now, we've crossed State Road 19 at Dead River, and so we have connected all of the residential development across State Road 19 through golf carts under our ordinance to the downtown. We've now been able to cross 441 at Hardee's, and that seems to be where the old crossing was. There was a bridge that used to cross old 441 many, many years ago. Unfortunately, when they widened 441, the city did not advocate to replace the bridge. And so the bridge was never replaced, and so it severed the residential community on the north side of 441 from our community, and making connections through sidewalks, golf carts, from that development to the downtown has been a little bit challenging. In addition to talking about golf carts under your multimodal section, if you could also address seaplanes and their role in our community from a transportation aspect. In addition to seaplanes, we have a railroad, and could you just talk a little bit about the $22 million grant we got to upgrade the railroad spine through Lake County to Orange County for continuous welded tracks and higher speed rail. And just take a look at that we've built a train station, other cities have not, and what role the train station that Tavares invested in, what role the new spine that runs through Lake County will have in the future from a multimodal perspective. And then I think the last one, and TJ touched upon it, is our trail. There's a $500,000 grant that the state has issued and is doing the study connecting downtown Tavares to downtown Mount Dora along Old 441, along or inside the old railroad bed. So if we can just look at those things and address them in the multimodal section, then I think you will have covered a lot of it.
There's one thing John left out in that, and that's all of the communities down 19 and how to connect them to downtown and the rest of Tavares, not just across 441.
James, you have a chart of county roads where you indicate a level of service C. Can you explain to the group exactly what a level of service C means for those roadways?
Sure. So depending on the roadway type, and most of these are going to be two-lane, actually all of them are two-lane. What the standard that we use for traffic engineering to determine the level of service is really percent of time you're stuck behind somebody else on an uninterrupted flow highway, or if you're at an intersection, how dense the road is, vehicles per lane per mile. So when that transfers from a percent time following or a density of roadway, it gets from the quantitative to the qualitative, where now we're just talking about C being kind of a feeling about how you feel about traffic. So that's one way that engineers have learned to relate to normal people in public meetings by saying, instead of, hey, it's this dense per lane per mile per vehicle, we can say, well, it operates more or less as a level of service C. It's more qualitative measures.
Now, level of service is not the condition of the road, but the volume that it can handle.
It's how it's operating, correct. So it's
now a level of service C. Would that be a road designation that you would say could accommodate future growth?
Yeah, absolutely. So the standard within the city is level service B. So there's a lot of room between a minimum C when you get into that C category up to a D. Personally, I've never been a huge fan of that level of service measure because it confuses people more than it helps, I think. I like that column to the left of it, that volume to capacity measure, where it's building up to a 1, and a 1 is a condition where your volume and capacity are the same. And once you're over 1, guess what? You have a roadway that's hitting the streets.
So what you're illustrating is that all of these roads have capacity for growth in Tavares, and they are county roads.
That's correct. So
Big time capacity.
Yes.
They're nowhere near ones.
The highest I see is 551. It's running at a 0.78.
We're well, your illustration is that it's well above standard is the standard acceptable volume. We're above that on this chart.
On this chart, every single road has massive capacity for more development.
Correct.
So the funny one that I just noticed that Bob and I were talking about is East Main Street. And the reason this is funny is it's showing a level of service D. It's right exactly in the middle. It's between 19 and St. Clair Abrams. It says there's 7,659 cars average a day. But the thing is, ever since Tavares was bold enough to build the one-way pairs of Alfred and Caroline, it doesn't feel that way anymore. The one-way pairs work because the flow is there.
Yes. And typically, what we see is it increases capacity about 20% to do that.
Yeah.
We ready to keep going? Okay. So you may be saying, okay, now what, Kelly? What are we talking about?
561 is busy.
So Mike's going to talk about where we kind of, this is kind of that roadmap, kind of segueing from the road discussion to the roadmap of where we're starting to head with some of our analysis. So literally what Mike's going to talk about is we go through the existing comprehensive plan and the data inventory analysis. We start looking for things that as professionals, either we wouldn't recommend or that need to be changed because of state law and things like that. So Mike's going to walk us through that briefly, and we're going to get into some specifics as well.
Okay. So, like Kelly said, it's kind of getting into the nuts and bolts of updating the plan. The first kind of process we went through in collaboration with city staff is we've developed this matrix that outlines, here's a sample of it, of basically all the changes to Florida statute since the last comprehensive plan. So we went through each of these statute changes, found where that might be referenced in the existing plan, and analyzed whether an amendment was necessary to make sure that the plan is in compliance with statute. So we went through that process, and here's kind of a summary of kind of the main things that we're looking at just because of the age of the plan. Most of what we found in this review was reflecting the new terminology per the state, making sure that is consistent throughout the plan. There's references to repealed statutes like 9J5. There's reference to DRIs and some changes in concurrency requirements, and so on and so forth. So we've noted those, and we've actually...
To help with that, just so people understand what repealing 9J5, what DRIs being removed means, what concurrency being removed from roads means, it means a really, really, really watered down growth management legislation in Florida. So whatever protections we had back in the 2000s, a lot of those are gone.
Right, a lot of these are rolling back of things.
Yeah. And literally what we do is...
And that's really important to point out. So the state went to more of a pro-growth and development by getting rid of development of regional impacts and all of that.
Correct.
Okay.
And now, if anybody wants to see that full list, the state land planning agency, it's the Department of Economic Opportunity, to actually go to floridajobs.org. Of course, people always go, well, why are you applying for, what are you looking for jobs? Like, no, that's the way they set it up. And if you go to community planning, there is a listing of every single statutory change that has been done since growth management laws have been enacted. So we literally take when the last comprehensive plan was adopted by the city, and we started that year. So in this case, basically 2010, we go through that list of everything through 2018, and actually we just got a couple of new ones based off of the governor's signature a couple of last week, and basically identify yes, yes, no, 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 no. And some of it is simple, it's just definitions. Some of it's making references to military facilities or things like that, but there's other things that are substantive in there. So that's the low-hanging fruit, that's the minimum stuff that we have to do at this point.
Yeah, per statute. So from there, the next level of analysis of the current plan is where we went through each goal, objective, and policy in the current plan, and this was shared amongst our team internally, and various subject matter experts from land use to transportation, the environment, so on and so forth. And so, again, this was in collaboration with city staff. Our team made an initial recommendation on each GOP within the plan. Some didn't require much attention, some did require some significant changes, and some of our recommendations are even stylistic as far as readability, clarity for the plan, because someone mentioned it earlier, it's really up to the city how you want to use it. So, and the trend in these plans, I think this came up in our May 7th meeting, is making them more clear for the community at large. So, so that's just an example of the matrix that we use. And then eventually, when we get further in the process, if these certain policies move, we'll say, this is where it is in the new comp plan, this is where you can find it. Say it moves into a different element or a different page, so on and so forth. And that's part of the process with the state. Again, kind of a brief overview without going line by line. Here's some of the things that we found, kind of generalizing the bulk of our recommendations. I think we kind of touched on this before, but there's a lot of land development regulation language within the comprehensive plan that is not required to be there. And I know that this group is going to be involved in updating land development regulations, but a lot of that stuff can come out of the comp plan. I'll show you an example of that here shortly. Again, consistency of terms. Again, this is for clarity, readability. For example, there's references to a unified land development code and references elsewhere to land development regulations, so just kind of cleaning those things up. References to specific dates. I have an example up there, which kind of indicates the age of the current plan. So there's some reference to by December of 2001, the city's going to do this. So those are some things we picked up on. And then a lot of our recommendations are related to policies that might be in different elements that read very similarly, and we try to identify areas where we can consolidate those, again, for clarity for the reader. So from there, I think I kind of summarized, I kind of gave you the overview of those line-by-line recommendations. And then here's kind of some of the broader, kind of taking that a step further. And so like I mentioned, some of those things of cleaning this up. So again, this is getting into the nuts and bolts of what the plan is going to eventually look like. So for example, in the future land use element, there's a lot of legal descriptions of surveys for certain properties or certain developments. Our plan is to move those to an appendix where it still can be available to be referenced, but not necessarily having to flip through 9-10 pages of that.
And I want to apologize for a couple of those, because when I was a baby planner, we didn't know any better. This is not the way you do comprehensive planning. It's to go in and site-specific for a policy, so I apologize for that.
Well, I apologize, TJ. We were inadvertently calling you out there. So.
Way to go, Mike.
Sorry. Big boo on my part there. So. Yeah. So I mentioned before, we found around 25 instances of land development regulation language within the comp plan. Here's just some examples that we just pulled from the matrix where these kind of get into specific implementation measures, not necessarily the kind of guiding vision and policy of the plan. So the group here will be addressing these as part of the process too.
And one thing I'll say is, for those of you who were here at the first meeting, we pointed out the state statutes very early on very clearly says the comp plan is not intended to be your land development regulations. The code, the regulations should be a separate document in the code itself. So if you're seeing things in the comprehensive plan that say, sidewalks of a minimum of 5 feet shall be provided along all internal streets and all of this, so that's a code component. And I asked the question of the broader group then of, let's say that somebody comes through and they want to modify the code to do a 8-foot multimodal path versus a 5-foot on both sides and only do it on one side. Could you technically legally do that without amending your comp plan?
Supposed to.
Not supposed to, because the comp plan has that as a guiding principle, and at that point you're no longer consistent with the comp plan. Now, that's taking a very narrow focus, but when we look at comprehensive plans all across the state, we see a lot of communities that have identified. We actually had one, the Public Works Director will love this, as far as pipe sizes, hydrant flow rates, and some other things. And literally, that should be in a technical manual and civic construction documents, not in the comprehensive plan. So, at the end of the day, we'll probably have more than the 25, I will say that.
That was an initial pass. And then from there, we kind of got into our meeting of the minds as far as some things to put out there on the table.
So notice we are standing close to the door for a reason.
All right. So Kelly? No.
So, part of the discussion, and this is one of those great, we could have told you that a while ago, we need to come up with a new future land use designation. I think Mr. Curry pointed out aptly, and so did you, John. We go from the minimum in the city of 3 dwelling units per acre to the county, which has 1 to 5. What happens when those areas get annexed until there's a comp plan or a zoning change? You got an inconsistent land use at that point. So right there, you know that you need to create something that is more of a transitional designation that reflects what's in the county and those standards, and also protects property rights and the development concerns that we've heard a couple of times tonight. Because the last thing we want to do is drop 3 dwelling units per acre on every property that's in the ISBA. It doesn't make sense. So one of the charges that the staff has said to us is, think about, look at, identify.
And just to add to that, one of the things I'd like to see them look at, and we need to talk about it, is a state zoning or a state land use out in that whole Deer Island area. What if the city, said that there are areas in the city that will have 1 unit per 5 acres, or 1 unit for 10, or 1 unit for 3, or whatever the number is, in areas where the look and feel of that area is already an estate type of area. And what if there were areas where it was very dense for more compact housing, and in other areas where it was multimodal and apartments that went up instead of out? And so the point is that, as we look at the ISBA, and I think just to remind everybody what the ISBA is, it is where the future growth of the city will be forever. So 5 years ago, we negotiated the future of the city with all of our sister cities in Lake County. We met with Mount Dora. We met with Leesburg. We met with Astatula. We met with Howie in the Hills. We met with every single city and said, where is the future boundary of Tavares forever? Will you agree to this line? Will you agree to this line? And we went to Lake County. Where is the future of Tavares forever? And through a 2 years negotiations process, we got an agreement with all these cities in Lake County to sign. So that the future of Tavares, for example, between here and Mount Dora is Bay Road. Mount Dora will never go past Bay Road. Tavares will never go past Bay Road. And so the ISBA is a very large area, and we know that we will never annex beyond there forever. The city right now is about this big. And so the question is, should you be doing a comprehensive plan for just your city or the ISBA? I think the answer is you need to look at the whole ISBA, because there's people out there in Shirley Shores that may not want to come into the city, or if they ever do, they want to know that they have 5 acres per unit, or 3 acres per unit, or 10 acres. So that was one of the things that were pointed out, and the answer to your question originally was, hey, did you look at the whole thing? Because if you're just looking at this, that's different than this. And you are looking at the whole ISBA as you go through the comp plan process.
And I want everybody to remember that first bullet point, because I'm going to kind of gloss over these next 3, actually the next 2, because those are some things just from more usability, readability. Yeah, we still have to have chapters mandated by the state that says we have to have currency management, or whatever we're going to call it at the end of the day, and intergovernmental coordination. What we found is, if there is a specific policy regarding intergovernmental coordination on land use, why not put that at the tail end of that future land use element, so that instead of having to read 2 or 3 chapters, you got 1 chapter, and everything regarding land use is right there. So that's one of the things we talk about. Transportation, yeah, the state said we have to come up with level service standards for bikes, peds, and also for transit. So we're adding and creating that. One of the policy decisions that we need from the city and this group is kind of looking at, James said we are adopted level service D as in David? Okay. Is that where we want to be? Do we want to make it E as in Echo, or do we want to make it C as in Charlie? Keep in mind, if you move it up, there's a certain level of improvements that have to go along with that. That means the city is now on the hook for more money to fund those improvements. So that kind of becomes that general thought of, are we good with where we are right now with D? Because, as the city manager pointed out, we've got a lot of capacity still to meet on that and still meet those standards.
Real quickly on the transportation, first of all, I forgot to emphasize when you were making notes, that even though we don't have the money in the plan, we still as a city need to advocate through the MPO for 19 and 561, because look at the traffic counts.
Correct.
When it comes to transit, so Lake County is taking the Federal Transit Administration money that they're due, and they're running Lake Express, so it's not costing Tavares anything. And basically, if that FTA federal money ever goes away, I don't think the county commission is going to make up that money. I've never seen them do something. So I think that as a city, we advocate to continue to work with Lake County on using the federal dollars that are our dollars that we already sent to Washington, and we're getting back, and we're getting people to work riding the bus. So the issue is, it's 1 hour before the bus comes through downtown, and it only goes one way because of the way they routed the bus. So it's things like that that I think should be in that chapter. Is what are we doing with transit? Is 1 hour good enough? Should we have a route that's consistent east-west? When it comes to pedestrian, the biggest issue I see is the city has done a really good job of addressing ADA sidewalks that you can actually walk on without tripping, including, I've seen all over town, so Public Works has been great. They've addressed sidewalk gaps, but what we haven't got to yet is the connecting of neighborhoods, whether it be from Banning Beach Road across 441 into downtown via a pedestrian bridge or whatever that may be, golf carts. I'm frustrated that I live in a neighborhood over by the YMCA, and you can't easily walk to the elementary school that is literally, I could throw a rock at it. But there's a railroad and some wetlands, and there's no pedestrian connectivity. So those type of opportunities I'm very interested in looking at. And if you're looking also at future land use designations, in addition to what the county is doing in these transition areas, I would really like for us to have a discussion about where high density is appropriate and what high density actually is.
So that's going to key in and to this. So right now the city has 2 mixed-use land use designations that require residential as well as commercial and office and some other things. One of the things that we've identified and kind of looked at is, especially, when you're saying, John, looking at not only just these small areas, but looking at citywide, to kind of go with the theme of that new estate type of land use designation, and the discussions we've heard tonight of let's put density where it really needs to be, is let's look at some modifications to those mixed-use standards. I will tell you that your current standards for mixed use, the retail and commercial components, are very, very low, as are some of the density components. and they're not conducive to really trying to create a true mixed-use environment in and around the downtown area.
In the 1990s, the comprehensive plan, the city thought, you know, we need to do something to create economic development downtown. So we're going to take a bunch of the homes and we're going to rezone them from residential to mixed use. And that's when the conversions began to attorneys' offices and engineering offices and surveyors and so forth, supportive of county services. So when that happened, though, a phenomenon occurred. You had less people living in downtown, and our downtown was dead. The only thing, when I moved here in 2002, I was fascinated by this bridge over Main Street. And then I realized, oh, that's the jail to the courthouse. It was a distinct architectural feature, but that's all that was the striking feature. And now, it's completely different. But I will never forget being the planner here and going, I wonder if they realized that they were literally pushing residents out of downtown when they changed all these houses to mixed use.
So part of that overall discussion is, I will tell you that the county, when they talk about mixed use, they're talking about what we call floor area ratio. So how many square feet can go on 1 acre? Their ratios are 2 to 3. So just for frame of reference, let's say that you have a 10,000 square foot lot in the county, and you're in one of their commercial designations or one of their mixed use designations. It has what we call a floor area ratio of 3. That means that for that 10,000 square feet of lot, you could have 30,000 square feet of business on that lot. Now, I will tell you, most developments that we see, work with, or play with, and design, nowhere near that. Nowhere near that. Your Publix is lucky if it's running, I'll say, what we call, basically what's called a 0.25. So 1/4 of the land is actually being, sorry, I just went a black cat. Great. I got my train off. But,
Hey, we need to wrap it up for 7 o'clock, and I just also, when you wrap it up, I just want to remind everybody, this is a 2-year process. We're going to take public input, public input, public input. It's going to go to the P&Z, public input. We're going to go to the City Council, public input. So we're not going to be solving a 2-year comprehensive plan tonight or at the next meeting or at the meeting after that. This is going to be a process where we continue to get documents, review, refine, look at, input, back and forth, constantly.
so just kind of...
He's got a quick question. Go ahead.
Yeah. Would it be possible for us to get notified of the meeting in advance? I signed up with my email last time. I signed up this time. If it wasn't for Don, I wouldn't have known about this meeting at all. And you guys had my email address from last time.
Absolutely. Yeah, this was a technical advisory committee meeting where public could come, and we will do a better job of those who attend the meetings and adding them when there's a technical advisory committee meeting.
So, as John said, I'm going to stop at this slide right there. This gentleman has his hand up.
Just a quick thing I hope you would add to your chart is to look at the alternative of not annexing property that's in that ISBA where they have to have water and sewer, but instead just run the lines out and they pay the city a fee. Mount Dora, I know, is doing some of that, or Eustis, and I think that ought to be an alternative rather than people having to be annexed into the city.
That is going to strictly be a policy decision by the folks that sit up here, the mayor, the elected folks. Part of it comes down to economics, because the city's got to pay to run those lines, maintain them, extend them.
The developer pays for those.
I'm saying, well, if they're...
The city doesn't pay.
No, I'm saying if the city has to extend the line because of, let's say TJ lives out there and he's all of a sudden deciding he wants to do something, yeah, the developer's going to do a certain thing, but then they're going to turn the lines over to the city at some point. So ongoing maintenance. So what I will say is there's a couple other things that, we're just kind of looking at. We've got a lot of categories that are very, very close together that could really be consolidated. And when we start talking about consolidation, we're talking about designations that have less than 10 acres across the city. And we're talking about something that is less than 2 dwelling units different per acre. So we're talking about, just looking at those two with the suburban expansion with low density and the moderate and medium, we're talking about a difference of less than 200 units. if you were to consolidate those types of things.
What is our most dense category, and we're generally, have you spotted that on the map? In downtown?
Yeah, maximum is 25.
Okay.
25 units an acre. Now
Yeah,
proposed in
and
an
then last
industrial.
but not least, just for tonight, like I said, we are coming up with a compatibility policy to kind of help with some of those discussions as far as what should be next to what are some of those thoughts and ideas, etc. So, with that, general comments, general things you want to make sure we're thinking about, things that you see in the comp plan, not a code, but in the comp plan that we need to make sure we're looking at.
Usage just about 6 weeks ago modified their FAR area ratios. I think it's something you should look at, is to look at compatibility with what they did there.
And where'd you say that was?
Eustis.
Next town over.
I thought you were saying you as in Y-O-U first. Yeah. What else?
I think compatibility of land uses is very important, especially after the discussions the council went through about the Shirley Shores area. The one thing that, as a planner, that I'm still trying to resolve is the water and sewer lines out there have been there for 20 years. So there has to be a balance between making the land uses work, but understanding the infrastructure's there. So you've got the water and sewer, but you don't have a good road. So if the policies really help the council make decisions based on those kind of factors, I think that would be something to look at.
And I think it's already been said, but I did not mention the bus system under multimodal. When you do the multimodal, we've been putting bus stations all up and down and around the city, and that's a good point you brought up. You don't call it buses, what do you call it?
Electric Express?
Transit.
Fixed route transit, multimodal.
Multimodal. Yeah, the buses.
Fixed route.
John, I just want to circle back to your estate zoning. I want to assure the group that Killinghorn and city staff are spending a lot of time discussing the new future land use designation that will be used for preservation of a rural lifestyle out towards Deer Island. So we've heard those folks loud and clear, and it's our intention to go through this process. And one of the things we'll keep in mind is balancing a certain lifestyle that some folks want to have that will eventually be integrated.
Thank you.
It's actually on 2 different pages, so page 2 and 3 now.
There's been multiple discussions tonight about the need to coordinate with the county for obvious reasons, roads, et cetera, and I would like to encourage that because I don't think there's been enough of that. And I would state that I think an awful lot of my personal animosity that you see coming out from me is represented by a whole lot of people that aren't in this room. And you could solve it with the stroke of one pen. And what it comes down to is people's wallets. I would love to be a member of the City of Tavares. I would love to be absorbed by an annex by the city. But I'll be damned if I'm going to have it would cost me $30,000 plus about $2,500 a year in increased taxes. So when the city absorbs something, they should take responsibility for it, and the county should lose the responsibility and should lose the revenue. So if I've got a net change for the same level of service, I'm happy to be a member of the Tavares. But paying double doesn't work for us.
Yeah, maybe get somebody from the county here at these meetings.
Yeah, I know you're talking with the county, I know Mike's talking with the county. And we're also talking with the transportation planning organization.
We got somebody from the county. You.
Yeah, I'm the unincorporated guy.
So, okay, I don't want to hold anybody up if you've got other plans. Like I said, we're going to be here for the next little bit. So if you want to come up and ask us.
Thank y'all for coming. We will send out emails to people who signed up and make sure you know when the next meeting is.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.